Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Okay, this is Bhagavad Gita, as it is, translated with commentaries by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And I just came back from a meeting. We did a little chanting, and then we read from Bhagavad Gita, took a little prasadam, spiritual food, and spent a little time hanging out with each other, a little associating. And so we read from chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, about 4 or 5 verses from the middle of the chapter, more or less. And there was this one verse, text 21. I wanted to look at this again because Prabhupada, okay? So this is text 21. Yo yam tanum bhakta shradayarchitum ichati tasya chalam shradam tam eva vididam yaham. And the translation is, I am in everyone's heart as the super soul. As soon as one desires to worship the demigods, I make his faith steady so he can devote himself to some particular deity. Okay, I'm in everyone's heart. When you desire to worship the demigod, usually for material things, I make his faith steady so he can devote himself to some particular deity. Okay, and in the purport, Prabhupada starts out with, God has given independence to everyone. If a person desires to have material enjoyment and wants very sincerely to have such facilities from the material demigods, the Supreme Lord, as Super Soul in everyone's heart, understands and gives facilities to such persons. As the Supreme Father of all living entities, he does not interfere with their independence, but gives all facilities so they can fulfill their material desires. Some may ask why the all-powerful God gives facilities to the living entities for enjoying the material world and lets them fall into the trap of the illusory energy. The answer is that if the Supreme Lord or Super Soul does not give such facilities, then there's no meaning to independence. Therefore, he gives everyone full independence, whatever one likes. But his ultimate instruction we find in the Bhagavad Gita: man should give up all other engagements and fully surrender unto him. That will make man happy. This is very interesting purport. So Prabhupada is establishing here that God has given everyone independence, and you can choose. If you have material desires, then the Lord will fulfill them. He does not interfere with your independence. You can have what you want. And the reason it's like that is there's no meaning to independence if you can't make your own decisions, even if it means to turn away from God. So in the next paragraph, Prabhupada says, both the living entity and the demigods are subordinate to the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here's where it gets funny. He's saying, you have independence. You have independence. You can choose. But then he says, the living entity and the demigods are subordinate to the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Wait a minute, what happened to my independence? They're subordinate. Therefore, the living entity cannot worship the demigod by his own desire, nor can the demigod bestow any benediction without the supreme will. Where did the independence go? As it is said, not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But didn't we just read in the first paragraph where God has given independence to everyone? But now he says, not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Generally, persons who are distressed in the material world go to demigods, as they are advised in the Vedic literature. A person wanting a particular thing may worship such and such a demigod. A diseased person is recommended to worship the sun god. If you want education, you worship Goddess Saraswati. If you want a beautiful wife, you worship Goddess Uma, the wife of Lord Shiva. This is described in the Vedic scriptures. In this way, there are recommendations in the Shastras for different modes of worship of different demigods, and because a particular living entity wants to enjoy a particular material facility, the Lord inspires him with a strong desire to achieve benediction from that particular demigod, and so he successfully receives the benediction. The particular mode of the devotional attitude of the living entity toward a particular type of demigod is also arranged by the Supreme Lord. The demigods cannot infuse living entities with that kind of affinity, but because he is the Supreme Lord, or the Super Soul is present in the heart of all living entities, Krishna gives impetus to worship certain demigods. The demigods are actually different parts of the universal body of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, they have no independence. Prabhupada is using this word independence in a lot of different ways in this purport. It's really, sometimes when we see how Prabhupada writes, it's really fascinating. He's very poetic. And he uses the words, wow. In the Vedic literature, Taittiriya Upanishad, it is stated, the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Super Soul is also present within the heart of the demigod. Therefore, he arranges through the demigod to fulfill the desire of the living entity. But both the demigod and the living entity are dependent on the supreme will. They are not independent. Wait a minute, the first paragraph, Prabhupada said, God has given independence to everyone. And then there's a discussion, and then the last sentence is, but they are not independent. So how do we understand that? How do you understand? He says God's given independence to everyone, but then he says, but no, they're not independent. So the independence that God's given to everyone is to decide how you want to be dependent on him. Do you want to be dependent on him in ignorance and think you're independent? Or do you want to depend on him in knowledge and be very happy to be dependent on God? So that's the independence, is you can choose how you want to be dependent. Because not a blade of grass moves without the mercy of the Lord. Do you want to have the illusion? He's given the independence to choose illusion. So he has given independence. You can choose. You're independent in making that choice. You can choose the illusion of independence. Krishna, independent, and the reason he does that, let's explain, is if he didn't give that kind of independence to choose illusion, or to choose truth and knowledge and bliss and God, then there wouldn't be the opportunity for love. There would be no meaning to a loving exchange if you have no choice. He gives everyone full independence, whatever he likes. Whatever you like, you have full independence. But you're still dependent on me to fulfill those desires. Always dependent on the Lord. No one is independent. He's fulfilling the desires of everyone. Just amazing how that works. And Prabhupada sums it up in the last paragraph to the purport. So Krishna makes all these arrangements. The living entity, he has some material desire, and by following Vedic prescriptions, you can get a lot of money, you can get a beautiful partner, you can get whatever it is you want. And the good health, the Vedic scriptures describe how to do that by approaching demigods in a certain way. But the supersoul is within the heart of the demigod. The supersoul is within the heart of the person who's trying to fulfill the desires. And he's making all the arrangements. The demigod can't fulfill anything independent of a relationship with God. And even the living entity who's approaching the demigod, Krishna says, I make his faith steady so he can do it. At every step of the way, completely dependent on Krishna. But Krishna says, but I give full independence. You can choose. But whatever you choose, it's me that's fulfilling it. It's me, you depend on me. You're dependent on me. You're never independent. It's just amazing. This is an amazing purport, especially the way Prabhupada does it, where he stresses about God has given independence to everyone. But then he says, but the living entity and the demigod are dependent on the will of the Supreme Lord. The living entity can't worship the demigod by his own desire, nor can the demigod bestow any benediction without the supreme will. Not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They're just not conscious of Krishna in all of it. Oh, Krishna. It's amazing. Krishna gives the impetus to the man to worship certain demigods, knowing the person's desire. And the demigods are actually different parts of the universal body of the Supreme Lord. They have no independence. Amazing. Both the demigod and the living entity are dependent on the Supreme Will. They're not independent. Oh, Krishna. Wow. We read another verse too, and there was some good stuff popped out of that one in the purport. It was text 19 in that 7th chapter. Bahunam janmanamante gyanavanmam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti sa mahatma sadurlabha. That's text 20, chapter 7. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada's purport: the living entity, while executing devotional service or transcendental rituals, after many, many births, may actually become situated in transcendental, pure knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate goal of spiritual realization. In the beginning of spiritual realization, while one is trying to give up one's attachment to materialism, there is some leaning towards impersonalism. But when one is further advanced, he can understand that there are activities in the spiritual life and that these activities constitute devotional service. Yeah, in the beginning, you're trying to give up attachment to materialism, seeing everything material. The tendency is to overcompensate and kind of go into kind of like an impersonal view. One way to kind of look at it is, I remember hearing a little illustration, is that if a person is engaging in activities that are unwholesome, that aren't good for them and aren't good for anybody else, then they might just like have to be put in the corner and just kind of like sit there and don't do anything. Just sit there and don't, like a bad child, just, misbehaving, like in a classroom, causing a disturbance, whatever. Just go sit in the corner and don't do anything. So that's kind of like trying to give up all these material activities that are entangling, and then they might just go in the corner and don't do anything. Just so that's kind of like tending toward impersonalism. In the beginning, when someone begins to practice trying to give up attachment to material things, you might like overcompensate and tend toward doing nothing. But when one is further advanced, he can understand that there are activities in spiritual life, and that these activities constitute devotional service. Now, I was just reading earlier from another chapter of the Gita about chapter 8, actually, where Arjuna is asking Krishna, what is karma, what is Brahman, there's a lot of questions. And one of the questions, one of the questions is, what is karma? So I was looking up karma. What is karma? It wasn't waiting for Krishna's answers. They're going to be in the verses that would follow. And so I just thought, well, let me just look up karma. So what do they say about karma? And usually we think of karma as like, karma's a material thing. It's karma is good karma, bad karma. Karma is always entangling. But that's not actually what karma necessarily means. That's a type of karma. Karma means activities. So there's a type of activity that's entangling, and that's usually what we think of when we think of karma. But really, the broader sense of the word is activities. So in that sense, Krishna has karma. But his karma is not entangling. If you look at karma, meaning activity. So Krishna's karma is his pastimes. They're not entangling. And for the materially conditioned soul, their karma or their activities are entangling. But karma itself really is more like meaning activities. So we're trying to give up material activities. We tend to lean toward doing nothing, impersonalism. But when further advanced, you can understand there are activities in spiritual life, and these activities constitute devotional service. It becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrenders to Him. Oh no, here comes independent. At such a time, one can understand that Lord Krishna's mercy is everything, that he's the cause of all causes, and that this material manifestation is not independent from him. He realizes the material world to be a perverted reflection of spiritual variegatedness, and realizes that in everything there is a relationship with Lord Krishna. Hare Krishna. In this body, there are powers of speaking, of seeing, of hearing, and of mental activities, etc. But these are not important if not related to the Supreme Lord. Because Vasudeva is all-pervading and everything is Vasudeva, the devotee surrenders in full knowledge. Hare Krishna. So we were reading those verses tonight. It's really nice to go back over them and look at them again a little bit. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. We had some nice discussion. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhakta.